I recently came across some stanzas in a poem I hadn't noticed before, which relate to Owain of Rheged. Some of the scholarship surrounding these stanzas reinforces my own suspicions about Owain and Mabon ap Modron and how they were understood by early Welsh poets and storytellers. Some of you will be familiar with parts of what I'm going to present, but I'll try to fill in the background a bit with material I also cover in my Mabon and Maponus class and in my Old North class. Mabon ap Modron, whose story is told in the Welsh saga Culhwch and Olwen, is the son of Modron. She's understood as a later Brythonic reflex of the Gaulish goddess Matrona. In the same way, Mabon is thought to be a reflex of the deity Maponus, who's known in Gaul and in North Britain around the Solway and Hadrian's Wall. As the reflex of a deity, naturally Mabon ap Modron's story isn't considered to have any basis in history. He's more like a literary character representing an earlier deity. As such, the mentions of him in Welsh literature might reflect events from the myth of Maponus, but it's not easy to unravel what the myth really looked like. Owain of Rheged, on the other hand, is believed to be a historical person. The son of Owain of Rheged, who lived in the 6th century, he was active in the Old North, especially around the Solway estuary. All sorts of legends became attached to Owain, and it's difficult to separate legend from history, or to understand how some of the legends might reflect history, or even myths and religious ideas. As well as being the son of Owain, Owain of Rheged is also said to be the son of a supernatural woman called Modron. As usually happens in Welsh literature, Modron isn't called a goddess in these stories, but she's presented as something like a member of the Tylwyth Teg or fairies. In one text, she's described as the daughter of the king of Annwfn, in another as the daughter of Avatach. She appears to Owain in mysterious circumstances, washing at a ford. They have sex, and a year later, Modron presents Owain with twins, Owain and his sister Morvedd. This makes Owain of Rheged and Mabon ap Modron half-brothers, at least as far as legend goes. The situation feels a little odd, but it's not unusual for there to be legends of early medieval nobility interacting and even producing children with deities or supernatural individuals. Mabon ap Modron himself has a couple of possible reflexes in early Welsh literature. The only one we need to concern ourselves with is Pryderi, the son of Rhiannon. Like Mabon, he is the son of a mother who seems to be more goddess or fairy than mortal. Like Mabon, Pryderi is taken from his mother in infancy and undergoes a period of imprisonment. Both Pryderi and Mabon are associated with a boar hunt and a story in which swine are tracked through the landscape. My own theory about this is that stories of Pryderi and Rhiannon in the Mabinogi probably reflect myths and folklore about Mabon and Modron, with the characters being renamed at some point. Why would this happen? Perhaps because both Mabon and Modron were names of well-known saints. That might have made later storytellers uncomfortable about using their names for otherworldly characters, or have influenced them to rename them to avoid confusion. There are a few references to Owain's exploits that might possibly reflect history. One of the historical poems of Taliesin describes a battle in which Owain and Owain encounter the Anglian king Teodric, son of Ida. He demands hostages, but the battle goes in favor of the Britons. In another of Taliesin's poems, Owain is said to have killed Teodric, although we don't know whether it was in the same battle. According to biographies of Saint Kentigern, the patron saint of Glasgow, Kentigern was the son of Owain, but saints' stories are famously unreliable. Owain's name soon becomes entangled with the kind of Arthurian stories which begin with Geoffrey of Monmouth and Chrétien de Troyes in the 12th century. The native Brythonic roots of these stories are badly obscured by the more popular overlay of courtly romances, but it seems that the three Welsh romances, Owain, Peredur and Geraint, are the best places to look for the native strands, in spite of being influenced by Geoffrey and Chrétien. There's an episode in the Welsh romance Owain, or The Lady of the Fountain, in which Owain encounters a magical well or fountain. It's described like this. In the middle of the valley you will see a great tree, its branches greener than the greenest fir trees. And under that tree there is a well, and near the well there is a marble slab, and on the slab there's a silver bowl, fastened to a silver chain, so that they cannot be separated. Throw a bowl full of water over the slab, and then you will hear a tumultuous noise. And after the noise there will be a very cold shower, a shower of hailstones, and it will be difficult for you to survive it. And after the shower there will be fine weather, and there will not be one leaf on the tree that the shower will not have carried away. And then a flock of birds will alight on the tree, and you have never heard in your own country such singing as theirs. Pryderi finds a very similar fountain in the third branch of the Mabinogi. He could see, approximately in the middle of the courtyard, a fountain with marble stonework around it. Beside the fountain was a golden bowl attached by 4 chains, which was above the marble slab, with the chains reaching up into the air, and he could not see the end of them. He was inspired at the beauty of the gold, and at how good the workmanship of the bowl was. But while these wells or fountains are similar, the result of encountering them is very different. Pryderi becomes a prisoner, not only stuck to the golden bowl, but imprisoned somewhere where his wife and best friend can't find him. Imprisonment is one of the things Pryderi has in common with Mabon ap Modron, who's held captive beneath the walls of Gloucester Castle for a long time, until he's located by a magical salmon and freed by Arthur and his men. But Owain isn't really a prisoner in The Lady of the Fountain. His encounter with the well calls forth a black knight who Owain defeats. The effect of this is that Owain soon becomes the new Black Knight, the consort and guardian of the Lady of the Fountain. Owain isn't imprisoned after he kills the Black Knight, although when he tries to enter the lady's city, he is briefly trapped in the portcullis, which gruesomely cuts his horse into. I'm not sure if that counts as imprisonment, since in the story, a pretty girl comes along and has him out in no time. You can tell that there's some kind of conflation or confusion or something like that going on when it comes to Mabon and Owain. This is demonstrated in a poem from the 11th or 12th century about a cattle raid involving Owain, which frequently mentions Mabon. At least some of the mentions of Mabon may refer to a contemporary of Owain of Rheged, a cousin of his father called Mabon ap Idno, but at other times both Owain and Mabon seem to be surrounded by a slight otherworldly glow in this poem. Unfortunately, there's no clear storyline to guide us, just the excitement of a cattle raid and skirmish. Prominent was Mabon from the other realm in the battle where Owain fought for his land's stock. Swooping into the fray and inciting battle, the inescapable destroyer from the land of Mabon, when Owain attacked for the sake of his father's cattle, shield lime and wax and thorns splintered. Whoever saw Mabon on his white-flanked ardent steed, as men mingled contending for Rheged's cattle, unless it were by means of wings that they flew, only as corpses would they go from Mabon. Celticist John Koch notes not only the cult of Maponos in the region around the Solway and Hadrian's Wall, but also the cult of the Matres, or mother goddesses. Although the precise boundaries of Rheged are unclear, this area is probably at its heart. So where are we so far? Mabon is the son of Modron, and he's definitely a prisoner. There's no story about Mabon and a well or fountain. Although, remember how I said that Mabon is a reflex of the Gaulish deity Maponos? Well, there was a famous healing spring in Gaul, which seems to have been dedicated to Maponos. An inscription to Maponos, which was thrown into the well, asks him to intercede with the underworld in a magical working of some kind. Is that significant? Too far removed from our stories about Mabon and Owain? Make up your own mind. Pryderi encounters a well in the third branch and is then imprisoned. He isn't said to be the son of Modron, but I've mentioned that Rhiannon might be the reflex of Modron. She's certainly otherworldly. This always felt like a frustratingly incomplete set of comparisons. Owain isn't really a prisoner, but then we can't expect the life of a historical person to follow the arc of a myth. Except maybe Owain was a prisoner. Until recently, I'd overlooked these obscure stanzas from another poem. This one is part of the poetry associated with Llywarch Hen. Llywarch was the first cousin of Owain of Rheged, and he has a significant role in the story of Owain's death and the loss of Brythonic territory in the north which followed. This was a tragic and difficult time for the nobility of the Old North, as stronghold after stronghold fell to the Anglian invaders. Like the so-called legendary poetry associated with Taliesin, the poems of Llywarch Hen were composed some centuries after these events had taken place. They're spoken in the voice of Llywarch as a dramatic device. This poetry wasn't intended to be read quietly from a book. It would have been recited by bards in the courts of the nobility of the day. According to the legends described in these poems, Llywarch had many sons, all of whom died in battle, and Llywarch, now an old man, bitterly rues his role in coercing them to fight. The poem I want to look at is of this type. It appears to be a dialogue between an otherwise unknown warrior called Pelis and Llywarch's son, Mechid. Like many poems in this group, the hardships of winter are a theme, and there appears to be some indecision as to whether the expedition they are planning is brave or merely foolhardy. First day of winter, brown and black the tips of the heather, sea wave foams, short the day, let your counsel be accomplished. Shield sheltered on a spirited steed, with warriors brave and bold, fairer than night to pursue a foe. The matter is decided and they ride through the snow. Since you find the ford so easily, and so much snow falls, Pelis, how are you so skilled? I feel no fear in Britain tonight, attacking the country of Nichain on a white horse following Owain, he replies. Then Mechid asks, Pelis, in what country were you raised? The one whom God deliver from dire imprisonment, the kind of lord whose spear is red, Owain of Rheged raised me. This reference to Owain's imprisonment is so brief you might overlook it. The one whom God deliver from dire imprisonment, Owain of Rheged. And apparently, Pelis is his foster son. Fosterage to build ties between families was a common practice among the medieval nobility of Wales. I wish I could tell you that these stanzas are part of a cohesive story, but that would be too much to hope for. The conclusion of the poem doesn't tell us whether Owain was freed, only that Mechid, like all the sons of Llywarch Hen, was killed fighting. The poem isn't really about Owain, but this brief reference to his imprisonment suggests that the episode would have been well known to the listeners. You might wonder why I'm so interested in this. It would be a fair question. I can only answer that I'm fascinated by the way the descendants of Coil Hen, and particularly the generations of Kinvarch and Irien, are mythologized. They often seem to take up roles which are similar to the roles of deities in other myths. And this leads me to ask, what was going on? Perhaps the poets and storytellers, who were now all at least nominally Christian, felt a need to pass on the old pre-Christian stories. Putting great mortals into the places of deities may have been a more comfortable way to perpetuate these myths. Or, as several scholars suggest, perhaps the cult of Maponos lived on in the north among the children of Kinvarch. Jenny Rowland, in her book Early Welsh Saga Poetry, has this to say: several factors suggest that the tale is a mythological one, or influenced by mythology, despite the naturalistic account. Evidence suggests that Owain ap Urien was confused with, or equated with, Mabon ap Modron. John Koch in The Celtic Heroic Age writes, "The warfare and cattle raiding of Modron's mortal son Owain are likened to the heroic exploits of her divine son Mabon, and that praise of Owain seems to be interlaced with the references to the tribal god." Frank Olding suggests, "It seems possible that traditionally the eldest son of the Coiling dynasty in Rheged was regarded in some way as the embodiment or incarnation of the god Maponos. The Old North doesn't yield up its secrets readily, but there are plenty of gems if you keep searching." If you'd like to delve a little deeper into the topics in my videos, you might enjoy taking one of my online classes. You can also support my work on Ko-fi or by becoming a patron. All the links are in the description.